The bullet left the muzzle at 2,800 feet per second, cutting through the thin mountain air of Afghanistan like a whisper of death. 20-year-old Marine Lance Corporal Marcus Chen felt the familiar kick of his M40A5 sniper rifle against his shoulder, but this time was different. This time, the mathematics of ballistics had bent to something beyond calculation, beyond training, beyond anything the Marine Corps had taught him in the windswept ranges of Camp Pendleton. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. The target, a Taliban commander preparing to detonate an IED that would have vaporized a school bus filled with 43 children dropped instantly at a distance that would later be measured at 2,847 meters. Nearly 3 kilometers. A shot that, according to every ballistics expert who would later examine the evidence, should have been physically impossible given the rifle, the ammunition, the atmospheric conditions, and the curvature of the Earth itself. But Marcus Chen wasn't thinking about physics as he watched through his scope. He was thinking about the small girl in the yellow dress he'd seen boarding that bus 3 hours earlier, her gap-toothed smile as bright as the Afghan sun. He was thinking about his little sister Emma back in San Francisco, who wore that same expression when she played hopscotch on the cracked sidewalk outside their apartment building. He was thinking about promises made and kept, about the weight of a trigger pulled with the precision of prayer. The silence that followed the shot seemed to stretch across the entire Kunar province, settling into the rocky crevices of the Hindu Kush mountains like ancient dust. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, lying prone beside Marcus, slowly lowered his binoculars, his weathered face frozen in an expression somewhere between awe and disbelief. "Jesus Christ, Chen," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind that had been howling across the ridge all morning. "What the hell did you just do?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was still pressed against his rifle, eye to scope, watching the school bus continue its journey down the dusty road below, oblivious to the catastrophe that had just been prevented. The children inside were singing. He could hear their voices, carried on the wind, a melody in Pashto that he didn't understand but felt in his bones nonetheless. Their innocence remained intact, their futures unshattered, their mother's hearts still whole. The spotter's logbook would later record wind speeds of 37 knots, gusting to 45, with a temperature differential that created thermals, capable of throwing a bullet 6 feet off course at half the distance Marcus had just covered. The humidity was wrong, the barometric pressure was dropping ahead of an incoming storm, and the angle of the shot required compensating for not just bullet drop, but the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself. Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Hawkins had been watching from the command post 2 clicks away, coordinating the mission through her radio headset while simultaneously calculating firing solutions on her tablet. 22 years in the Corps, recipient of the Bronze Star for her actions in Fallujah, and she had never seen anything that defied the fundamental laws of marksmanship the way Marcus Chen's shot just had. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised the radio to her lips. "Overwatch 1, this is CP. Confirm target neutralized. How copy?" "CP, Overwatch 1. Target is down. Repeat, target is down. Children are safe." Marcus's voice came through the static steady and calm, but Hawkins could hear something underneath it, not pride, not excitement, but a kind of quiet bewilderment, as if he himself couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The brass cartridge case lay beside Marcus in the rocky dirt, still warm to the touch. Later, ballistics experts would examine this single piece of evidence with the intensity of archaeologists studying an ancient artifact. They would measure every dimension, analyze the primer strike, test the powder residue. They would find nothing unusual, nothing that could explain how a standard 7.62 millimeters NATO round had somehow defied every known principle of exterior ballistics. Private First Class Tommy Nakamura, the team's communications specialist, had been filming the mission for routine after-action review when Marcus took the shot. The footage would become legendary within military circles, studied at sniper schools and ballistics laboratories around the world. But in that moment, Tommy simply stared at his camera's LCD screen, replaying the few seconds of video over and over, watching the impossible trajectory traced by the barely visible vapor trail against the clear Afghan sky. The Taliban commander's body lay motionless beside the improvised explosive device he'd been preparing to trigger. Intelligence later revealed that the IED contained over 200 pounds of military-grade explosives, packed with ball bearings and fragments of rusty metal enough to turn the school bus into a crater and its young passengers into memory. The detonator, a simple cell phone connected to a battery pack, rested in his dead fingers, the screen still glowing with an unsent message that would have initiated the explosion. But it was the personal items scattered around the commander's position that would haunt Marcus for years to come. A photograph of a young boy, perhaps 8 years old, tucked into the man's vest pocket. A letter written in careful Arabic script, folded and refolded so many times the creases had worn white. A small wooden prayer bead, polished smooth by countless fingers. Evidence of a life that, despite its terrible final purpose, had once contained love and hope and dreams deferred. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of wild poppies that grew in impossible profusion across these war-torn mountainsides. Marcus inhaled deeply, tasting dust and cordite and something that reminded him of his grandmother's garden in Chinatown, where she'd taught him to cultivate patience and precision, while tending her impossible collection of orchids in coffee cans and mason jars. Chen, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice brought him back to the present. We need to move. Extract point is 12 minutes out, and there's going to be a shitstorm of questions when we get back to base. Marcus finally lifted his head from the scope, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the broader perspective of the mountainous landscape around them. The Hindu Kush stretched endlessly in every direction, peaks and valleys carved by millennia of wind and weather and war. Somewhere in those mountains, other children were walking to school. Other mothers were preparing meals. Other fathers were making choices between survival and morality that no human being should ever have to make. The M40A5 rifle in his hands felt heavier now, its weight increased not by physics, but by the magnitude of what had just occurred. This weapon, manufactured in a sterile factory in Connecticut, shipped halfway around the world, and placed in the hands of a 20-year-old kid from San Francisco's Richmond district, had just reached across nearly 3 kilometers of hostile terrain to save 43 lives. But as Marcus began the methodical process of securing his weapon and preparing for extraction, one question echoed in his mind with the persistence of a prayer. How had he known? Not the ballistics, those could be calculated, compensated for, adjusted with enough skill and experience. But how had he known, with absolute certainty, exactly when to squeeze the trigger? How had he felt the precise moment when all the variables, wind, temperature, humidity, the rotation of the earth itself, aligned into a narrow window of possibility that lasted perhaps half a second? The school bus had disappeared around a bend in the mountain road, carrying its precious cargo toward safety and the mundane miracles of another ordinary day. But the echo of that impossible shot would reverberate through Marcus Chen's life for decades to come, changing not just his destiny, but the destinies of everyone who witnessed what happened on a windswept ridge in Afghanistan on a Tuesday morning. In October, as the extraction helicopter's rotors began to thrum in the distance, Marcus took one last look through his scope at the empty mountainside, where the Taliban commander's body lay still and silent. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting long shadows between the rocks and illuminating the countless hidden stories that these ancient mountains held. And somewhere in that vast landscape of beauty and brutality, 43 children, were arriving at school, alive and laughing, and completely unaware that their futures had just been preserved by a shot that should never have been possible. Marcus Chen's hands were still shaking when he walked into the mess tent 6 hours later. The debriefing had lasted 4 hours, 4 hours of ballistics experts, intelligence officers, and command staff asking the same questions in different ways, as if repetition might unlock the secret of what had happened on that ridge. Each time, Marcus gave the same answer. I saw the target, calculated the variables, and took the shot. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. The mess tent buzzed with the usual evening chaos of hungry Marines, the clatter of metal trays against metal tables, the smell of reheated beef stroganoff, and instant coffee strong enough to dissolve metal. Marcus grabbed a tray and moved through the line automatically, his mind still replaying those crucial seconds when he'd pressed his eye to the scope and somehow known, absolutely known, when to fire. "Hey, Ghost." Private First Class Danny Morrison called out from a corner table, using the nickname Marcus had earned for his ability to appear and disappear in the field without making a sound. "Heard you pulled off some Houdini shit today. Come tell us about it." Marcus shook his head and found an empty table in the back corner, away from the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed him across the tent. He'd never been comfortable with attention, even as a kid growing up in the Richmond district, where being noticed usually meant trouble. His mother, Lynn Chen, had raised him and his sister Emma on the principle that good children were quiet children, that drawing attention brought problems their family couldn't afford, that the beef stroganoff tasted like cardboard. But Marcus forced himself to eat anyway. His body needed fuel, and he'd learned long ago that Marines who didn't eat when they had the chance often regretted it later. As he chewed methodically, his mind drifted back to the shooting range at his high school in San Francisco, where Mr. Peterson, the JROTC instructor, had first noticed his natural ability with a rifle. "Chen, you've got steady hands and good eyes," Peterson had said after watching 17-year-old Marcus put 5 rounds into a quarter-sized group at 100 yards. "But more than that, you've got patience. Most kids your age want everything fast. CARS, fast food, fast results. You understand that some things are worth waiting for. That patience had been hard-won. Growing up as the son of Chinese immigrants in a neighborhood where most families struggled to make rent, Marcus had learned early that rushing led to mistakes, and mistakes led to consequences his family couldn't afford. Leaving for work just as David returned home, their lives intersecting only in the brief moments when one was coming while the other was going. In their small, 2-bedroom apartment above the Golden Dragon grocery store, she was everything Marcus wasn't: outgoing, fearless, quick to laugh, and quicker to forgive. Where Marcus observed the world with careful calculation, Emma embraced it with the unconscious confidence of a child who had never known real want or fear. "Marcus, why do you always look so serious?" she'd asked him just before he shipped out to boot camp, her small hands playing with the dog tags he'd just received in the mail. "Don't you ever just want to run around and be crazy?" He'd smiled. Then, one of his rare, genuine smiles that transformed his usually stoic face. "Somebody has to be the serious one, Em. But when I get back, maybe you can teach me how to be crazy." That conversation felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 2 years. 2 years of Marine Corps training, of learning to be a weapon as precise and reliable as the rifles he carried. 2 years of discovering that his natural patience and steady hands made him ideally suited for the lonely, pressured world of military snipers. 2 years of serving his country while sending most of his pay home to help his parents and to put money aside for Emma's college fund. The mess tent was beginning to empty as Marines finished their meals and headed off to various evening duties. Marcus picked at his food, his appetite diminished by the weight of the day's events and the growing realization that his life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single trigger pull. Word was already spreading through the company, then the battalion, then beyond. A shot like that couldn't be kept quiet. Not in an age of digital communications and social media. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at his table without invitation, sliding his bulk onto the metal bench with the casual authority of a career Marine. "Chen, we need to talk." Marcus looked up from his tray, meeting Rodriguez's dark brown eyes. The staff sergeant was a 20-year veteran from East LA, a man who'd survived 3 combat deployments and seen enough young Marines come and go to recognize when one of them was struggling with something bigger than standard battlefield stress. "I'm fine, Staff Sergeant," Marcus said automatically, the reflexive response of a Marine who'd learned that admitting problems often created more problems than solving them. "Bullshit." Rodriguez's voice was quiet, but firm. "I've been doing this job long enough to know the difference between fine and fucked up. And right now, you look like a kid who just realized he can do magic, but doesn't know what that means." The analogy was uncomfortably accurate. Marcus set down his plastic fork and leaned back against the tent wall. "How do you deal with it? When something happens that doesn't make sense?" "You mean like watching a 20-year-old Lance Corporal make a shot that should have been impossible?" Rodriguez chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Chen, I've been in this business long enough to see things that would make civilian ballistics experts shit themselves. I've seen Marines make shots they shouldn't have made, survive explosions they shouldn't have survived, find their way out of situations that should have been death sentences." "You want to know how I deal with it?" Marcus nodded. "I stopped trying to understand the how and focus on the why. Today, you saved 43 kids. That's what matters. The rest is just mathematics and mystery, and both of those are above my pay grade." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the sounds of the base settling into its evening rhythm. Generators hummed, radio chatter crackled from the communications tent, and somewhere in the distance, a guitar played. A melancholy tune that Marcus recognized but couldn't name. "Staff Sergeant," Marcus said finally, "what if it wasn't just luck? What if I'm supposed to be able to do things like this?" Rodriguez studied him carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if today wasn't an accident? What if there's something about me, something I don't understand, that makes me different?" Marcus struggled to put his feelings into words. "When I was lining up that shot, it was like the rifle was talking to me, like it was showing me exactly when to fire. I know that sounds crazy. Son, I've been in 3 wars and seen Marines do things that would sound crazy to anyone who wasn't there to witness them. The only thing that matters is whether you can control it and whether you use it for the right reasons." Rodriguez leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "There are going to be people who want to study you, Chen. Officers who want to figure out how to replicate what you did today. Scientists who want to run tests and take measurements. You prepared for that?" Marcus hadn't thought about it, but now that Rodriguez mentioned it, he could already see how his life was about to change. No more anonymous competence, no more quiet professionalism. He was about to become a phenomenon, a case study, a curiosity, for people who saw him as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a Marine trying to do his job. "I just want to serve my country and take care of my family," Marcus said. "I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be special. I just want to do my job." "Too late for that, son. You made the shot, and now you've got to live with the consequences. The question is, what kind of Marine are you going to be going forward? Are you going to let this define you, or are you going to define it?" As if summoned by their conversation, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell appeared at their table. She was a small woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes the color of winter sky, but she commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. "Lance Corporal Chen, I need to speak with you." "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you're welcome to join us." They followed her to a small briefing room adjacent to the command post, where Marcus was surprised to find several people he didn't recognize. A man in civilian clothes with the bearing of a federal agent, A woman in army uniform with insignia Marcus didn't recognize, and an elderly gentleman whose presence seemed to command automatic deference from everyone else in the room. Lance Corporal Chen, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell began. I'd like you to meet Dr. James Harrison from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, Colonel Elizabeth Warren from the Army's Human Performance Research Division, and she paused slightly, Mr. Thompson, who represents certain interested parties within the intelligence community. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was exactly what Rodriguez had warned him about, happening faster than either of them had anticipated. Gentlemen. Ma'am, Marcus said, defaulting to military courtesy while his mind raced through the implications of their presence. Dr. Harrison spoke first, his voice carrying the measured cadence of academia. Lance Corporal Chen, what you accomplished today represents a significant advancement in our understanding of human potential under extreme circumstances. We'd very much like to conduct some tests. No. The word came out of Marcus's mouth before he'd consciously decided to speak. Everyone in the room turned to look at him, and he felt heat creeping up his neck. But something deep in his core, some instinct he'd inherited from parents who'd learned to be wary of official attention, told him that these people represented a path he didn't want to walk. I'm sorry? Dr. Harrison looked genuinely confused. No tests, no studies, no experiments. Marcus kept his voice steady and respectful, but firm. I'm a Marine sniper. I took a shot, and I hit my target. That's what you trained me to do. If you want me to take more shots, point me at more targets. But I'm not a laboratory rat. The room fell silent. Marcus could feel everyone's eyes on him, could sense the surprise and perhaps a hint of admiration from Rodriguez, could see the calculation in the eyes of the people who'd come to study him, like a particularly interesting specimen. Mr. Thompson finally spoke, his voice carrying the soft authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Lance Corporal, I don't think you understand the significance of what happened today. The ballistics alone. The ballistics don't matter, Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. 43 kids are alive tonight because I did my job. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise. He thought about Emma, about his parents, about the life he'd left behind in San Francisco and the life he was trying to build in the Marine Corps. He thought about the school bus disappearing around that mountain curve, carrying its precious cargo towards safety and normalcy. And he realized that no amount of scientific study or government interest could be worth sacrificing the simple clarity of that purpose. I want to go back to my unit, Marcus said. I want to continue serving as a Marine sniper. And I want to be left alone to do my job. The tension in the room was palpable. These were people unaccustomed to being told no by a 20-year-old Lance Corporal. But as Marcus looked around at their faces, he saw something that surprised him. Respect, maybe even a little admiration. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell cleared her throat. Lance Corporal Chen, you're dismissed. Report to your normal duties tomorrow morning. As Marcus left the briefing room, he heard Dr. Harrison's voice behind him. Colonel, surely we can't just let him walk away. The implications for military applications alone. Doctor, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's voice cut him off. That Marine just made an impossible shot to save 43 children, and then had the moral courage to tell a room full of senior officers and government officials that he won't be turned into a circus act. I'd say his judgment is pretty sound. Marcus didn't hear the rest of the conversation. He was already walking back toward his bunk, his mind clearing for the first time since he'd pulled that trigger. He had a job to do, a family to support, and a promise to keep to a little girl in a yellow dress whom he'd never met but would never forget. Tomorrow, he would wake up, clean his rifle, and prepare for whatever mission came next. He would continue to be Marcus Chen, Marine sniper, son of immigrants, protector of the innocent. And if that path occasionally led him to make impossible shots, well, That was between him and whatever force had guided his bullet across those 3 kilometers of Afghan air. The stars above Firebase Courage were bright and cold, pinpricks of ancient light in a sky that had witnessed countless human struggles across the centuries. Marcus looked up at them as he walked, thinking about distance and time and the mysterious forces that sometimes allow ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. He thought about his grandmother's orchids, growing impossible and beautiful in their makeshift containers. He thought about his father's scarred hands, working 16-hour days to build a better life for his children. He thought about Emma's fearless laugh and his mother's quiet strength, and he realized that maybe the most impossible shot of all wasn't the one he'd made today, but the one his parents had taken 23 years ago, when they'd left everything they knew to build a new life in a country where their son could grow up to become whatever he chose to be. Even if what he chose was to serve that country as a Marine sniper who occasionally performed miracles with a rifle and a steady hand. The next morning brought trouble in the form of a full bird Colonel Marcus had never seen before, flanked by 2 men in suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a government recruiting poster. Colonel Bradford was tall, gray-haired, and carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent decades believing that military authority could solve any problem. The suits introduced themselves as Agent Reeves and Agent Martinez from an agency whose acronym Marcus didn't recognize, though their badges looked official enough. Lance Corporal Chen, Colonel Bradford began without preamble, "You've been temporarily assigned to a joint task force studying advanced marksmanship techniques. Pack your gear. You're flying to Quantico this afternoon." Marcus felt the familiar knot in his stomach that had appeared whenever authority figures made decisions about his life without consulting him. It was the same feeling he'd had as a kid, when social workers visited their apartment, asking questions about his parents' work schedules and Emma's school attendance, their clipboards and concerned expressions barely concealing their power to tear his family apart. "Sir, with respect, I'd prefer to remain with my unit. We have operations scheduled. This isn't a request, Marine." Colonel Bradford's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Your country needs you to help us understand how we can train other Marines to replicate what you accomplished yesterday. You'll be serving the greater good." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at Marcus's shoulder, his presence both comforting and ominous. "Sir, Lance Corporal Chen is a vital part of our sniper team. We have missions that specifically require his skills." Agent Reeves stepped forward, consulting a tablet computer with the casual efficiency of someone accustomed to reorganizing people's lives with digital precision. "Staff Sergeant, we appreciate your unit's needs, but this is a matter of national security. The techniques Lance Corporal Chen demonstrated could revolutionize military tactics. Imagine if we could train an entire generation of snipers to perform at this level." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, her expression suggesting she'd been expecting this confrontation. "Gentlemen, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Lance Corporal Chen is currently assigned to my command, and I haven't approved any transfers." "Ma'am," Colonel Bradford replied, his tone suggesting he was accustomed to overruling lower-ranking officers. "This comes directly from the Pentagon. The Joint Chiefs are very interested in Lance Corporal Chen's capabilities." Marcus watched this bureaucratic chess match unfold around him, feeling increasingly like a piece of equipment being fought over by competing departments. He thought about his parents, who'd navigated countless such battles with immigration officials, school administrators, and government agencies, always smiling politely while protecting their family's interests with quiet determination. "Colonel," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the institutional posturing, "what happens to the missions my team was supposed to run? What happens to the Marines who were counting on Overwatch support? What happens to the civilians who might die because you pulled me out of the field to sit in a laboratory?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an artillery round. Colonel Bradford's expression hardened, But Marcus caught something else in his eyes, a flicker of respect, perhaps, or at least recognition that this 20-year-old Lance Corporal was asking the right questions. Other Marines will handle those missions, Bradford replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Which other Marines? Marcus pressed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, sir. How many snipers in this battalion can consistently hit targets beyond 1,500 meters? Rodriguez's answer was immediate and honest. Including you? 3, without you? 2, and neither of them has your consistency at extended range. Agent Martinez pulled out his own tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be personnel files. We've identified several candidates with exceptional marksmanship scores who could be transferred to fill any gaps. Paper scores, Rodriguez said with undisguised contempt. You want to replace a Marine who just made a shot that saved 43 kids with someone who looks good on paper? Sir, with respect, you don't know what you're talking about. The tension escalated when Captain Williams arrived, accompanied by Gunnery Sergeant Hawkins and 2 Marines Marcus recognized as members of other sniper teams. Word had obviously spread about the bureaucratic battle for Marcus's services, and his fellow Marines were making their position clear through their presence. Sir, Captain Williams addressed Colonel Bradford, I've been reviewing the operational requirements for our sector. Lance Corporal Chen is scheduled for 3 high-priority missions over the next 2 weeks. Pulling him out would significantly compromise our ability to provide effective overwatch for infantry operations. Captain, I understand your concerns, Agent Reeves interjected, but the potential applications of what Lance Corporal Chen demonstrated yesterday extend far beyond a single unit's operational needs. We're talking about capabilities that could save thousands of lives if properly understood and replicated. Marcus felt the familiar weight of other people's expectations settling on his shoulders. It was the same pressure he'd felt in high school when college recruiters visited, promising scholarships and opportunities, while his parents worked double shifts to pay rent. The same pressure he'd felt when military recruiters painted pictures of adventure and education while carefully avoiding mention of the realities of combat. What if I refuse? Marcus asked quietly. The question created an immediate silence that was broken only by the distant sound of helicopters conducting training flights. Everyone in the room understood the implications. A Marine could theoretically refuse an assignment, but the consequences would be severe and long-lasting. Insubordination charges, reduction in rank, possible discharge under other than honorable conditions. His future, his family's financial security, his ability to use veterans' benefits for college, all of it could disappear with a single act of defiance. Lance Corporal, Colonel Bradford said with what he probably thought was paternal concern, I don't think you understand what you'd be giving up. This assignment could lead to commendations, promotions, opportunities for advancement that most Marines only dream about. You could help shape the future of military tactics. Marcus thought about his conversation with Rodriguez the night before, about the choice between letting circumstances define him or defining them himself. He thought about Emma, who would start high school next year and needed stability more than she needed a brother with medals and commendations. He thought about his parents, who'd sacrificed everything to give their children choices, not glory. Sir, Marcus said, what I understand is that there are Marines in the field right now who are counting on me to watch their backs. There are missions that need to be completed and lives that need to be protected. If the military wants to study impossible shots, maybe they should focus on creating impossible situations that require them, instead of pulling Marines out of the field to perform tricks in laboratories. The words came out stronger than Marcus had intended, and he immediately regretted the edge in his voice. But Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was nodding approvingly, and he caught Rodriguez fighting back a smile. Agent Martinez tried a different approach. Lance Corporal, what if we could arrange for your family to visit, your parents, your sister? They could see the important work you're doing, the contribution you're making to national security. The offer was clearly intended as an incentive, but Marcus heard it as a threat. The implication was clear. They'd investigated his family, knew about his parents' immigration status, understood exactly where pressure could be applied. It was a mistake that revealed more about their methods than they'd probably intended. "Agent Martinez," Marcus said, his voice now carrying a cold edge that surprised everyone in the room. "Are you suggesting that my family's immigration status might somehow be relevant to this conversation?" "Of course not," Martinez replied quickly. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room now understood that the federal agents had done background research that went beyond standard security clearances. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, her expression suggesting that the conversation had crossed a line she wasn't willing to tolerate. "Gentlemen, I think this meeting is over. Lance Corporal Chen will remain with my command until such time as proper procedures are followed for any potential transfer. That means written orders through the chain of command, not backroom pressure tactics." "Ma'am," Colonel Bradford's voice carried a warning, "you're interfering with a Pentagon directive." "Sir," Mitchell replied with ice-cold professionalism, "I'm protecting one of my Marines from what appears to be an attempt at coercion. If the Pentagon wants Lance Corporal Chen transferred, they can follow proper procedures. Until then, he remains under my command." The bureaucratic standoff continued for another hour, with phone calls to higher authorities and increasingly heated exchanges between the various factions. Marcus found himself caught in the middle of an institutional power struggle that had implications far beyond his individual situation. He was becoming a symbol of military independence versus federal oversight, of battlefield effectiveness versus laboratory research, of individual rights versus institutional needs. The breaking point came when Agent Reeves produced what he claimed was a direct order from the Secretary of Defense, demanding Marcus's immediate transfer to a classified research facility. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell examined the document carefully, then handed it to Captain Williams for review. "This isn't a legal order," Williams concluded after several minutes. "The format is wrong. The authorization codes don't match current protocols, and it bypasses the entire chain of command. Sir, with respect, this appears to be an attempt to circumvent proper military procedures." The accusation hung in the air like cordite smoke. Agent Reeves's face flushed, while Agent Martinez began making urgent phone calls on an encrypted satellite phone. Colonel Bradford looked genuinely surprised, suggesting that he might have been used as much as he was trying to use his authority. "Lance Corporal Chen," Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell said formally, "you are dismissed to return to your regular duties. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, please ensure that Lance Corporal Chen receives proper support and protection from any further unauthorized interference with his duties." As Marcus left the briefing room, he could hear heated arguments erupting behind him, but his attention was focused on the horizon, where smoke columns marked the locations of recent IED explosions along the supply routes his team was supposed to be monitoring. Real missions with real consequences, not theoretical applications. For hypothetical scenarios, Rodriguez caught up with him outside the command post. "Chen, you just made some very powerful enemies. You prepared for the consequences?" Marcus thought about his parents, who'd survived the Cultural Revolution, immigration to a foreign country, and decades of bureaucratic harassment while maintaining their dignity and protecting their family. "Staff Sergeant, my parents didn't come to America so their son could be turned into a government experiment. They came so he could serve his country on his own terms, with honor and integrity intact." "Good answer," Rodriguez replied. "But those people aren't going to give up. They'll be back with better paperwork and more pressure. You need to be ready for a long fight." The prediction proved accurate. Over the next several days, Marcus faced a steady stream of interviews, evaluations, and voluntary requests for cooperation with various research initiatives. Representatives from DARPA, the CIA, the Army Research Laboratory, and organizations he'd never heard of all wanted to understand his capabilities. Each approach was more sophisticated than the last, offering everything from accelerated promotions to full college scholarships for Emma. The pressure extended beyond Marcus himself. His fellow Marines began reporting unusual inquiries about his background, his training, his personal habits. Military psychologists appeared, claiming routine evaluations while asking questions that clearly weren't routine. Intelligence officers conducted security reviews that focused more on Marcus's family history than on any actual security concerns. Most disturbing of all were the reports from his parents that federal agents had visited their apartment, asking questions about Marcus's childhood, his school records, his medical history. They'd been polite but persistent, leaving business cards and suggesting that cooperation would be appreciated by the government agencies that handled immigration matters. The systematic pressure campaign reached its peak when Emma called him on the secure satellite phone, crying because classmates were asking questions about why FBI agents had visited her school to review her brother's educational records. The idea that his refusal to cooperate with government researchers was affecting his 8-year-old sister's life filled Marcus with a rage he'd never experienced before. "Staff Sergeant," Marcus said after receiving Emma's call, "I need to know my options, legal options. Because if these people think they can pressure my family to get to me, they've seriously miscalculated." Rodriguez studied his young Marine with new respect. "Chen, what you're talking about is going up against some very powerful institutions. You sure you want to start that fight?" Marcus thought about the school bus disappearing around the mountain curve, about 43 children arriving safely at their destination because he'd done his job with skill and integrity. He thought about his parents' courage in rebuilding their lives in a foreign country, and about Emma's fearless laugh that he was determined to protect. "They started the fight when they threatened my family," Marcus replied. "I'm just going to finish it." The next phase of the conflict began when Marcus requested permission to contact a military lawyer, only to be told that his situation didn't warrant legal representation. When he asked for clarification of his rights regarding experimental assignments, he was informed that such questions should be directed through his chain of command, the same chain of command that was clearly under pressure to deliver him to the research programs. "What if I refuse?" Marcus asked quietly. The question created an immediate silence that was broken only by the distant sound of helicopters conducting training flights. Everyone in the room understood the implications. A Marine could theoretically refuse an assignment, but the consequences would be severe and long-lasting. Insubordination charges, reduction in rank, possible discharge under other than honorable conditions. His future, his family's financial security, his ability to use veterans' benefits for college, all of it could disappear with a single act of defiance. "Lance Corporal," Colonel Bradford said with what he probably thought was paternal concern, "I don't think you understand what you'd be giving up. This assignment could lead to commendations, promotions, opportunities for advancement that most Marines only dream about. You could help shape the future of military tactics." Marcus thought about his conversation with Rodriguez the night before, about the choice between letting circumstances define him or defining them himself. He thought about Emma, who would start high school next year and needed stability more than she needed a brother with medals and commendations. He thought about his parents, who'd sacrificed everything to give their children choices, not glory. "Sir," Marcus said, "what I understand is that there are Marines in the field right now who are counting on me to watch their backs. There are missions that need to be completed and lives that need to be protected. If the military wants to study impossible shots, maybe they should focus on creating impossible situations that require them, instead of pulling Marines out of the field to perform tricks in laboratories." The words came out stronger than Marcus had intended, and he immediately regretted the edge in his voice. But Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell was nodding approvingly, and he caught Rodriguez fighting back a smile. Agent Martinez tried a different approach. Lance Corporal, what if we could arrange for your family to visit, your parents, your sister? They could see the important work you're doing, the contribution you're making to national security. The offer was clearly intended as an incentive, but Marcus heard it as a threat. The implication was clear. They'd investigated his family, knew about his parents' immigration status, understood exactly where pressure could be applied. It was a mistake that revealed more about their methods than they'd probably intended. Agent Martinez, Marcus said, his voice now carrying the cold edge that surprised everyone in the room. Are you suggesting that my family's immigration status might somehow be relevant to this conversation? Of course not, Martinez replied quickly. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room now understood that the federal agents had done background research that went beyond standard security clearances. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, her expression suggesting that the conversation had crossed a line she wasn't willing to tolerate. Gentlemen, I think this meeting is over. Lance Corporal Chen will remain with my command until such time as proper procedures are followed for any potential transfer. That means written orders through the chain of command, not backroom pressure tactics. Ma'am, Colonel Bradford's voice carried a warning. You're interfering with a Pentagon directive. Sir, Mitchell replied with ice-cold professionalism, I'm protecting one of my Marines from what appears to be an attempt at coercion. If the Pentagon wants Lance Corporal Chen transferred, they can follow proper procedures. Until then, he remains under my command. The bureaucratic standoff continued for another hour, with phone calls to higher authorities and increasingly heated exchanges between the various factions. Marcus found himself caught in the middle of an institutional power struggle that had implications far beyond his individual situation. He was becoming a symbol of military independence versus federal oversight, of battlefield effectiveness versus laboratory research, of individual rights versus institutional needs. The breaking point came when Agent Reeves produced what he claimed was a direct order from the Secretary of Defense, demanding Marcus's immediate transfer to a classified research facility. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell examined the document carefully, then handed it to Captain Williams for review. This isn't a legal order, Williams concluded after several minutes. The format is wrong, the authorization codes don't match current protocols, and it bypasses the entire chain of command. Sir, with respect, this appears to be an attempt to circumvent proper military procedures. The accusation hung in the air like cordite smoke. Agent Reeves's face flushed, while Agent Martinez began making urgent phone calls on an encrypted satellite phone. Colonel Bradford looked genuinely surprised, suggesting that he might have been used as much as he was trying to use his authority. Lance Corporal Chen, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell said formally, you are dismissed to return to your regular duties. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, please ensure that Lance Corporal Chen receives proper support and protection from any further unauthorized interference with his duties. As Marcus left the briefing room, he could hear heated arguments erupting behind him, but his attention was focused on the horizon, where smoke columns marked the locations of recent IED explosions along the supply routes his team was supposed to be monitoring. Real missions with real consequences, not theoretical applications. For hypothetical scenarios, Rodriguez caught up with him outside the command post. Chen, you just made some very powerful enemies. You prepared for the consequences? Marcus thought about his parents, who'd survived the Cultural Revolution, immigration to a foreign country, and decades of bureaucratic harassment while maintaining their dignity and protecting their family. Staff Sergeant, my parents didn't come to America so their son could be turned into a government experiment. They came so he could serve his country on his own terms, with honor and integrity intact. Good answer, Rodriguez replied. But those people aren't going to give up. They'll be back with better paperwork and more pressure. You need to be ready for a long fight. The prediction proved accurate. Over the next several days, Marcus faced a steady stream of interviews, evaluations, and voluntary requests for cooperation with various research initiatives. Representatives from DARPA, the CIA, the Army Research Laboratory, and organizations he'd never heard of all wanted to understand his capabilities. Each approach was more sophisticated than the last, offering everything from accelerated promotions to full college scholarships for Emma. The pressure extended beyond Marcus himself. His fellow Marines began reporting unusual inquiries about his background, his training, his personal habits. Military psychologists appeared, claiming routine evaluations while asking questions that clearly weren't routine. Intelligence officers conducted security reviews that focused more on Marcus's family history than on any actual security concerns. Most disturbing of all were the reports from his parents that federal agents had visited their apartment, asking questions about Marcus's childhood, his school records, his medical history. They'd been polite but persistent, leaving business cards and suggesting that cooperation would be appreciated by the government agencies that handled immigration matters. The systematic pressure campaign reached its peak when Emma called him on the secure satellite phone, crying because classmates were asking questions about why FBI agents had visited her school to review her brother's educational records. The idea that his refusal to cooperate with government researchers was affecting his 8-year-old sister's life filled Marcus with a rage he'd never experienced before. "Staff Sergeant," Marcus said after receiving Emma's call, "I need to know my options, legal options. Because if these people think they can pressure my family to get to me, they've seriously miscalculated." Rodriguez studied his young Marine with new respect. "Chen, what you're talking about is going up against some very powerful institutions. You sure you want to start that fight?" Marcus thought about the school bus disappearing around the mountain curve, about 43 children arriving safely at their destination because he'd done his job with skill and integrity. He thought about his parents' courage in rebuilding their lives in a foreign country, and about Emma's fearless laugh that he was determined to protect. "They started the fight when they threatened my family," Marcus replied. "I'm just going to finish it." The next phase of the conflict began when Marcus requested permission to contact a military lawyer, only to be told that his situation didn't warrant legal representation. When he asked for clarification of his rights regarding experimental assignments, he was informed that such questions should be directed through his chain of command, the same chain of command that was clearly under pressure to deliver him to the research programs. "General, I'm suggesting that some things work better when you don't try to explain them too much." The room fell silent again, everyone processing the implications of what Marcus was saying. He wasn't claiming supernatural abilities or special powers, but he was suggesting that his effectiveness as a sniper might be diminished rather than enhanced by too much analytical scrutiny. General Hayes studied him for a long moment, then made a decision that would change the trajectory of his entire career. "Lance Corporal Chen, I'm going to make you an offer. Continue your regular duties with your current unit. Participate in voluntary research sessions that don't interfere with your operational responsibilities. Maintain your autonomy and your right to refuse any procedures you're uncomfortable with. In exchange, help us understand whether there are training methods or selection criteria that might help other Marines develop similar capabilities." It was a reasonable compromise, but Marcus sensed that accepting it would be the first step down a path that would ultimately lead to the same destination the original pressure campaign had intended. Once he became a willing participant in the research programs, his autonomy would gradually erode as institutional needs took precedence over individual rights. "General, I appreciate the offer, but I have a counter-proposal." Everyone in the room looked surprised. A lance corporal making counter-proposals to a brigadier general was so far outside normal military protocols that it bordered on insubordination. "I continue my regular duties with full operational authority over my assignments and methods." I train other snipers in conventional marksmanship techniques, sharing everything I know about wind reading, ballistic calculations, and target acquisition. But I don't participate in any experimental programs, and my family is left completely alone. And what do we get in return? General Hayes asked. You get a Marine sniper who's committed to excellence in his field, and who's willing to share that knowledge with others, without the complications that come with turning warfare into a laboratory experiment. Marcus paused, then added, and you get to find out whether conventional training methods can achieve results that are just as good as whatever you think I did on that ridge. General Hayes considered the proposal for several minutes, her expression suggesting she was weighing not just the immediate implications, but the broader precedent that would be set by her decision. Lance Corporal Chen, your proposal has merit. But it also assumes that what you did was replicable through conventional training methods. Are you confident that's the case? Marcus thought about the dozens of hours he'd spent on shooting ranges, the thousands of rounds he'd fired in training, the careful development of muscle memory and mental discipline that had made him an effective sniper. He thought about all the conventional factors that had contributed to his success, and realized that the extraordinary shot might have been less about special abilities and more about the perfect convergence of preparation and opportunity. General, I think the shot I made was the result of good training, good equipment, good intelligence, and good luck. If we can replicate the first three factors consistently, maybe the fourth one will take care of itself. It was a humble answer that deflated much of the mystique surrounding his achievement, but it also offered a path forward that didn't require turning him into a case study or his family into collateral damage in a bureaucratic power struggle. General. Hayes smiled for the first time since entering the room. Lance Corporal Chen, I think you may have just solved a problem that's been keeping a lot of very smart people awake at night. We'll try your approach and see what happens. The first revelation came 3 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a routine training session with other battalion snipers. Marcus had been working with Staff Sergeant Torres, a veteran marksman from 29 Palms, helping him refine his technique for extreme long-range shots. The target was set at 1,800 meters, challenging but well within the theoretical capabilities of both the rifle and the shooter. Torres had been struggling with consistent accuracy at that distance, his shots grouping well but consistently hitting low and to the right. Marcus watched through his spotting scope, analyzing the subtle factors that might be affecting the trajectory. Wind speed was steady at 15 knots from the southwest. Temperature was 97 degrees Fahrenheit, and the barometric pressure was dropping slightly ahead of an incoming weather front. Staff Sergeant, Marcus said, try adjusting your elevation 2 clicks up and 1 click left. But more than that, try to feel the rhythm of the wind. It's not constant, there's a pattern to the gusts. Torres made the adjustments and settled into his firing position. Marcus continued to watch through his scope, calling out wind changes and atmospheric conditions. But as he observed Torres preparing to fire, something unexpected happened. Marcus found himself seeing not just the visible indicators of wind and temperature, but somehow perceiving the entire three-dimensional space between the rifle and the target. It was like looking at a topographical map of the air itself, with currents and eddies and thermal columns creating invisible highways that a bullet could follow if launched at precisely the right moment. Marcus could actually see the optimal trajectory, the perfect window of opportunity that would open for perhaps half a second when all the variables aligned. Now, Marcus said quietly, just as Torres was preparing to squeeze the trigger. Shot was perfect. Dead center at 1,800 meters, with the kind of precision that Torres had never achieved at that distance before. Jesus, Torres whispered, lifting his head from the scope. How did you know exactly when to tell me to fire? Marcus didn't have an answer. He was still staring at the space between their position and the target, watching the invisible currents of air that somehow remained visible to him even after the bullet had completed its journey. It was like having a sixth sense that revealed the hidden architecture of ballistics, the secret patterns that governed the flight of projectiles over long distances. The second revelation came during a mission. Brief 2 days later, Captain Williams was explaining the tactical situation for an upcoming operation when Marcus found himself seeing not just the map on the briefing board, but the actual terrain with startling clarity. He could visualize the exact positions of friendly forces, the likely locations of enemy combatants, the optimal firing positions for maximum effectiveness and minimum risk. More than that, he could see the probable sequence of events that would unfold during the mission, like a chess player visualizing multiple moves ahead. He saw where the enemy would likely establish positions, how they would respond to friendly movements, when and where the critical moments would occur that would determine the mission's success or failure. "Sir," Marcus interrupted the briefing, "what if we positioned Overwatch here instead?" He pointed to a location on the map that hadn't been part of the original plan. "It would give us coverage of the entire approach route, and if the enemy tries to flank our main force, we'd have clear fields of fire to stop them." Captain Williams studied the map, then looked at Marcus with curiosity. "Chen, how did you identify that position?" "It's not marked on the reconnaissance photos, and it's not visible from any of the aerial imagery we've reviewed." Marcus realized he had no rational explanation for his knowledge of the terrain. He'd never been to that particular location, had only seen it through satellite photos and topographical maps. But somehow, he could visualize it with the kind of detail that usually came only from personal reconnaissance. "I studied the maps extensively, sir. It just seemed like the logical choice based on the terrain features and the probable enemy positions." The mission proceeded with Marcus's suggested modifications, and everything unfolded exactly as he'd visualized. The enemy did attempt to flank the main force, and Marcus was able to neutralize 3 combatants from his Overwatch position before they could threaten friendly troops. But more significantly, his ability to predict the tactical situation had allowed the entire operation to proceed with minimal risk and maximum effectiveness. The third revelation was the most disturbing, because it suggested that his enhanced perception wasn't limited to military situations. During a video call with his family, Marcus found himself seeing details about his parents' lives that they hadn't mentioned. He could somehow perceive that his father was dealing with chronic back pain from years of restaurant work, that his mother was worried about their landlord's threats to raise the rent, and that Emma was struggling with a math teacher who had unrealistic expectations. "Dad," Marcus said during the call, "have you seen a doctor about your back? It looks like you're favoring your left side." His father looked surprised. "How can you tell that from a video call? The pain isn't that obvious." Marcus didn't have an answer. Through the pixelated image on his laptop screen, he was somehow perceiving information that should have been invisible. It was as if his enhanced situational awareness extended beyond the battlefield to encompass any environment he focused his attention on. The fourth revelation came when Dr. Harrison from DARPA returned to the base, this time with a different approach. Instead of demanding that Marcus participate in experimental programs, he brought a small team of researchers who were studying the psychological and physiological factors that contributed to exceptional performance in high-stress situations. "Lance." "Corporal Chen," Dr. Harrison began, his tone more respectful than during their previous encounter. "We're not here to conduct experiments on you. We're here to learn from you. Would you be willing to share your observations about what you experienced during precision shooting?" Marcus considered the request carefully. General Hayes's compromise had given him the authority to determine his own level of participation, and sharing his subjective experiences seemed less invasive than submitting to medical testing or psychological evaluation. "Dr. Harrison, what I experience isn't really about shooting technique. It's more like expanded awareness. When I'm preparing for a difficult shot, It's as if I can see patterns and connections that normally aren't visible." Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his academic interest clearly aroused. "Can you describe these patterns?" "It's like the air becomes visible, with currents and temperatures and pressure differentials that create paths for the bullet to follow. But more than that, I can see the timing, the exact moment when all the variables align to create the optimal trajectory." The research team exchanged glances, and Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations about enhanced spatial perception, temporal pattern recognition, and intuitive ballistics calculation. But what interested him more was their obvious excitement, as if his description had confirmed theories they'd been developing. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the shared surname, was a neuroscientist from Stanford who'd been studying exceptional performance in various fields. "Lance Corporal, what you're describing sounds similar to reports from other individuals who've demonstrated extraordinary capabilities in high-pressure situations. Athletes who can predict their opponent's movements, surgeons who can navigate complex procedures through intuition rather than just training, pilots who can handle aircraft malfunctions that should theoretically be impossible to recover from." "Are you saying there are other people who experience things like this?" Marcus asked. "We believe so. But most of them don't realize that their capabilities are unusual, or they attribute them to experience and training rather than recognizing them as forms of enhanced perception." Dr. Chen consulted her notes. "What's particularly interesting about your case is that your enhanced awareness seems to be triggered by situations involving the protection of others. Your most remarkable shots have occurred when civilian lives were at risk." The observation was accurate, but it made Marcus uncomfortable. The idea that his abilities might be somehow connected to his protective instincts suggested a level of psychological complexity that he wasn't sure he wanted to explore. The fifth revelation emerged during a conversation with Corporal Walsh, the military journalist who'd helped him find legal representation. She'd been following up on her investigation into experimental programs that used military personnel as research subjects, and her findings were more disturbing than Marcus had imagined. "Lance Corporal Chen," she said, showing him a folder of documents she'd obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. "I think you need to see this. The research programs that were pressuring you to participate have a history that goes back decades." The documents revealed a pattern of military personnel being recruited for studies that promised to enhance their capabilities while actually exposing them to significant physical and psychological risks. Project names that sounded innocuous: Enhanced Performance Initiative, Human Optimization Research, Advanced Warfighter Studies, concealed programs that had resulted in numerous casualties and cover-ups. These programs operate under the assumption that exceptional human performance can be artificially induced through pharmaceutical enhancement, genetic modification, or psychological conditioning, Walsh explained. But the evidence suggests that naturally occurring exceptional abilities are actually more common than they realize, and much safer than artificial enhancement. She showed him a classified report that had been partially declassified through her investigation. According to this analysis, approximately 3% of military personnel demonstrate some form of enhanced situational awareness or intuitive capability that can't be explained through conventional training. But instead of studying these natural abilities, most research has focused on trying to create artificial versions through experimental interventions. The report contained case studies of service members who demonstrated exceptional abilities, similar to Marcus's enhanced perception. A Navy SEAL who could navigate underwater in zero visibility conditions with impossible accuracy. An Air Force pilot who consistently detected mechanical problems before instruments registered any malfunction. An Army medic who seemed to know which wounded soldiers had the best chance of survival, even when their injuries appeared identical. What happened to these people? Marcus asked. Most of them were recruited for experimental programs. Some volunteered. Willingly, others were pressured through various means. The outcomes... Double quotes. Walsh paused, consulting her notes. 40% showed no change in their abilities. 30% experienced temporary enhancement, followed by permanent loss of their natural capabilities. 20% suffered severe psychological effects that ended their military careers. 10% died during the experimental procedures. The statistics hit Marcus like a physical blow. The research programs that had been so eager to study him had a track record of destroying the very abilities they claimed to want to understand and replicate. The sixth revelation came when Marcus decided to test the limits of his enhanced perception in a controlled environment. With Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's permission, he set up a series of increasingly difficult shooting scenarios to determine whether his abilities were consistent and reliable, or simply the result of occasional lucky intuition. The tests took place over several days with different atmospheric conditions, target distances, and levels of complexity. Marcus found that his enhanced awareness was indeed consistent, but only under specific circumstances. When he was shooting to protect others, his perception expanded dramatically. When he was simply trying to demonstrate accuracy, his abilities remained within normal human limits. It's like there's a switch that only activates when the stakes are high enough, Marcus explained to Rodriguez after completing the tests. If it's just target practice, I shoot like any well-trained Marine. But when lives are on the line, I can see things that shouldn't be visible. Rodriguez studied the test results with the analytical eye of a career military professional. Chen, what you're describing suggests that your abilities are connected to your motivation and emotional state, not just your technical skills. That's actually consistent with what we know about peak performance in high-stress situations. The seventh revelation was the most personal, and it came during another video call with his family. As Marcus watched his parents and Emma on the laptop screen, he realized that his enhanced perception was showing him something about their future, not specific events, but general trajectories and probabilities. He could see that his father's back problems would worsen without proper medical attention, eventually forcing him to leave restaurant work and find a different career. He could see that Emma's struggles with math would resolve when she found a teacher who understood her learning style, leading to academic success and scholarships for college. He could see that his mother's worries about their financial security were justified, but that solutions existed if they were willing to make certain changes. "Mom, Dad," Marcus said carefully, "I've been thinking about our family's future. What if we made some changes that could improve our situation?" He spent the next hour sharing observations and suggestions that seemed to come from his enhanced perception rather than logical analysis. He recommended that his father see a specific type of doctor for his back problems, suggested that Emma ask to be transferred to a different math class, and advised his parents to start looking for a new apartment in a different neighborhood, where rent was more stable. His parents listened with the patience they'd always shown when their children had ideas that seemed impractical or naive. But Emma, with the intuitive perception that children sometimes possess, looked directly into the camera and said, "Marcus, how do you know all this stuff? It's like you can see things we can't see." The question forced Marcus to confront the full implications of his enhanced abilities. He wasn't just an exceptionally skilled Marine sniper. He was developing capabilities that extended far beyond military applications into areas that touched on prediction, intuition, and forms of awareness that had no scientific explanation. The eighth and final revelation came when General Hayes returned to discuss the results of Marcus's training program with other snipers. Over the past month, Marcus had been working with 12 Marines, sharing his knowledge of conventional marksmanship techniques while carefully avoiding any mention of his enhanced perception. "Lance Corporal Chen," General Hayes began, "the results of your training program have been remarkable. The Marines you've worked with have shown an average improvement of 40% in long-range accuracy. More significantly, 3 of them have demonstrated capabilities that approach what you achieved on that ridge. The news was both encouraging and troubling. If conventional training could produce results that approached his enhanced abilities, it suggested that his perception might not be as unique as everyone assumed. But it also raised questions about what factors were actually responsible for exceptional marksmanship performance. General, have you identified what's different about the 3 Marines who've shown exceptional improvement? That's what's interesting. They don't fit any obvious pattern in terms of background, training, or psychological profiles. But they do share one characteristic. They all volunteered for training with the specific goal of protecting others more effectively. Their motivation isn't personal advancement or career development, it's service to their fellow Marines. The revelation completed Marcus's understanding of his own abilities. His enhanced perception wasn't a supernatural gift or a genetic anomaly. It was an expression of human potential that emerged when training, motivation, and circumstance aligned in exactly the right way. The impossible shot hadn't been the result of special powers, but of ordinary capabilities, pushed to extraordinary levels by the combination of preparation and purpose. General, Marcus said, I think I finally understand what happened on that ridge, and I think I know how we can help more Marines develop similar capabilities without experimental programs or artificial enhancement. General Hayes smiled. I was hoping you'd reach that conclusion, because based on what we've learned over the past month, I think you're right. The question now is whether you're willing to help us implement a training program based on these principles. Marcus thought about the school bus disappearing around the mountain curve, about the 43 children who'd arrived safely at their destination, about all the future missions where enhanced capabilities could mean the difference between success and tragedy. Yes, ma'am, but with one condition, which is, we do this the right way. No shortcuts, no experiments, no pressure tactics. Just good Marines learning to be better Marines, with honor and integrity intact. Agreed, General Hayes replied. Welcome to the future of military training, Lance Corporal Chen. A future where excellence comes from bringing out the best in people, not from turning them into something they're not. The most requested professional development program in the Marine Corps. But unlike the experimental programs that had originally sought to study Marcus, this approach focused on developing natural human potential through enhanced awareness, purposeful motivation, and precise technical skills. The first graduating class consisted of 24 Marines from various military occupational specialties, not just snipers. The program had evolved beyond marksmanship to encompass what Marcus had begun calling protective perception, the ability to enhance situational awareness when the safety of others was at stake. The graduates included infantry Marines who could detect IEDs with unprecedented accuracy, helicopter pilots who seemed to anticipate mechanical problems before instruments registered them, and medics who could triage casualties with intuitive precision. Master Sergeant Rodriguez had been promoted and placed in charge of implementing the program across multiple bases. Chen, he said during one of their regular review meetings, what you've created here isn't just a training program. It's a philosophy. You've proven that human beings are capable of extraordinary performance when they're properly motivated and trained, without artificial enhancement or experimental intervention. The success of the program had attracted attention from the highest levels of military leadership, but this time, the attention was supportive rather than exploitative. Secretary of Defense Patricia Coleman had visited the base to observe training sessions and interview graduates. Her conclusion, later documented in an official report to Congress, was that the Chen Protocol represented a revolutionary advance in military training that enhanced effectiveness while maintaining ethical standards. What impresses me most, Secretary Coleman had said during her visit, is that this approach produces better results than experimental programs that cost billions of dollars and put service members at risk. Sometimes the best innovations are the simplest ones. Marcus had been promoted to sergeant and given broader responsibility for developing training protocols that could be adapted to different military specialties. But he'd insisted on maintaining his operational status, continuing to serve as a sniper while developing and refining the program based on real-world experience. The most rewarding aspect of his new role was working with Marines who'd struggled with traditional training methods, but excelled once they understood the connection between purpose and performance. Corporal Maria Santos had been on the verge of being discharged for poor marksmanship scores when she entered the program. 6 months later, she was one of the top snipers in her battalion, with a record for precision that rivaled Marcus's own. Achievements. Sergeant Chen, Santos said during a training debrief, "I used to think good shooting was all about mechanics, breathing, trigger control, sight alignment. But what you taught me is that mechanics only work when they're connected to something bigger. When I'm shooting to protect my fellow Marines, everything clicks into place." The program's success had also attracted interest from civilian law enforcement agencies, who were eager to adapt the principles for their own training needs. FBI hostage rescue teams, SWAT units, and counter-terrorism specialists were requesting access to modified versions of the protocol. Marcus had agreed to consult on these adaptations, but only under strict conditions that ensured the integrity and ethical standards of the original program would be maintained. The academic world had also taken notice. Dr. Sarah Chen from Stanford had published several peer-reviewed papers on the psychological and neurological basis of the enhanced awareness that the program seemed to develop in participants. Her research suggested that the human brain was naturally capable of processing vastly more sensory information than previously understood, but that this capability was normally suppressed by conscious thought processes. What Sergeant Chen's program does, Dr. Chen explained during a presentation at the American Psychological Association's annual conference, is create conditions that allow the subconscious mind to process complex environmental data and present it to consciousness as intuitive awareness. It's not supernatural, it's an expression of human potential that we're only beginning to understand. The scientific validation of the program's effectiveness had helped silence critics who'd argued that Marcus's abilities were either fraudulent or the result of classified experimental enhancement. Independent testing by multiple research institutions had confirmed that program graduates consistently demonstrated improved performance across a range of tasks that required rapid processing of complex environmental information. More importantly, from Marcus's perspective, the program had produced measurable improvements in mission success rates and reductions in casualties. Over the course of its first year, units that had implemented the Chen protocol showed a 23% increase in mission effectiveness and a 37% decrease in friendly fire incidents. The enhanced situational awareness that participants developed wasn't just improving their individual performance, it was making entire units safer and more effective. The personal impact on Marcus's family had been equally significant. The increased attention and recognition had brought financial benefits that allowed his parents to move to a better apartment, and his father to receive proper medical treatment for his chronic back problems. Emma was now attending a specialized math and science program that challenged her intellectually while providing the support she needed to excel. But perhaps more important than the material improvements was the sense of validation that Marcus's success had provided for his parents. Decision to immigrate to America. Lin Chun had begun volunteering with other immigrant families, helping them navigate the complex process of accessing military benefits and educational opportunities for their children. David Chun had started working with a veterans organization that provided job training and placement services for former military personnel transitioning to civilian careers. "Marcus," his mother said during one of their weekly video calls, "your father and I always believed that America would give you opportunities to serve others with honor. We never imagined that your service would create opportunities for so many other families. Emma, now 13 and flourishing academically, had developed her own understanding of her brother's achievements. Marcus isn't special because he can make impossible shots, she told her friends when they asked about her famous brother. He's special because he uses his abilities to protect people who can't protect themselves. The program's success had also led to unexpected opportunities for Marcus himself. He'd been offered positions with civilian defense contractors, academic institutions, and government agencies that would have provided substantial financial rewards and career advancement. But he'd turned them all down, choosing to remain in the Marine Corps, where he could continue developing and refining the training protocols that had emerged from his experience. Sergeant Chen, General Hayes had said during his most recent performance evaluation, "You've reached a point where you could write your own ticket in terms of career opportunities. Are you sure you want to stay in the military?" Marcus had considered the question carefully. The Marine Corps had given him the training and opportunity to develop his abilities, had supported him when he'd faced pressure from experimental programs, and had provided the platform for creating something that could benefit thousands of other service members. "General, the Corps invested in me when I was just a kid from San Francisco who wanted to serve his country. Now I have the chance to help the Corps invest in other Marines who might have similar potential. I can't think of a better way to spend my career." The conversation had taken place on the second anniversary of the shot that had started everything. Marcus had requested permission to visit the site in Afghanistan where he'd neutralized the Taliban commander, wanting to see the location, where 43 children's lives had been saved by a combination of training, dedication, and perhaps a touch of something beyond conventional explanation. Standing on the same ridge where he'd taken that impossible shot, Marcus could see the school where those children had been heading that day. It was larger now, with new buildings and expanded programs funded by international aid organizations. Local reports indicated that enrollment had increased dramatically as security in the region improved, with hundreds of children now receiving education that would have been impossible during the height of Taliban control. The Taliban commander's body had long since been removed, but Marcus had brought something to leave in his place: a small wooden cross that his grandmother had carved, along with a Buddhist prayer flag that reflected his family's mixed religious heritage, and a Islamic prayer bead that he'd purchased from a local market. The three symbols represented different faith traditions, but they shared a common theme of hope and redemption. "I don't know if you can hear this," Marcus said quietly, addressing the memory of the man he'd killed, "but I want you to know that the children you were going to hurt are safe and learning and growing up to build a better world. I hope that whatever drove you to that choice, you found peace now." The wind that day was calm, nothing like the howling gusts that had challenged his shot 2 years earlier. But as Marcus prepared to leave, he felt the familiar expansion of awareness that signaled the presence of his enhanced perception. Not for shooting this time, but for understanding. He could see the interconnected web of consequences that had flowed from that single moment. The children who'd lived to become students and future leaders. The training program that had emerged to help other Marines develop similar capabilities. The families who'd been spared the grief of losing loved ones to preventable tragedies. The impossible shot had been just the beginning of a much larger story about human potential and the power of purpose-driven service. The Chen protocol had been implemented at 17 military installations worldwide. The success rate was consistent. Approximately 30% of participants showed significant improvement in their specialized skills, while another 40% demonstrated modest but measurable enhancement. Perhaps more importantly, 100% of participants reported increased job satisfaction and sense of purpose in their military service. The program had also begun to attract international attention. NATO allies were requesting access to the training protocols, and several foreign military services had sent observers to study the methods. But Marcus had insisted that international expansion proceed slowly and carefully, with emphasis on maintaining the ethical standards and voluntary participation that had made the program successful. Colonel Patricia Mitchell, now commanding officer of the Marine Corps' Training and Development Command, had been instrumental in protecting the program from bureaucratic interference while ensuring its continued evolution and improvement. "Sergeant Chen," she said during a planning meeting for the program's third year, "what you've created has become a model for how military innovation should work. It's based on solid principles, tested through practical application, and designed to enhance rather than exploit human capabilities." The comment reflected a broader shift in military thinking that had occurred partly as a result of the program's success. Instead of focusing on technological solutions or pharmaceutical enhancement, military leadership was beginning to recognize that the most significant improvements in combat effectiveness might come from better understanding and development of natural human potential. This shift had also influenced Marcus's personal relationships within the military community. He'd developed close working relationships with officers and enlisted personnel across all service branches, creating a network of professionals who shared his commitment to ethical development of human capabilities. These relationships had become the foundation for expanding the program's influence beyond the Marine Corps. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, the military journalist who'd helped Marcus navigate the early legal challenges, had been promoted to gunnery sergeant and assigned as the program's official historian and media liaison. Her role was to document the program's development and ensure that its principles and methods were preserved for future generations of military leaders. "Sergeant Chen," she said during one of their regular review sessions, "I've been following military training programs for over a decade, and I've never seen anything that's had the kind of positive impact that your protocol has achieved. But more than that, you've proven that the right approach to human development can produce extraordinary results without ethical compromises." The observation was particularly meaningful because Walsh had seen firsthand the destructive effects of experimental programs that prioritized results over the well-being of participants. Her brother Danny's death in the pharmaceutical trials had motivated her advocacy for ethical research standards, and Marcus's program represented the kind of approach she'd hoped someone would develop. The program's influence had also extended into Marcus's family life in unexpected ways. Emma, now excelling in her advanced mathematics program, had begun developing her own theories about human performance optimization. Her approach was purely academic rather than military, but it shared the same emphasis on ethical development of natural capabilities. "Marcus," she said during one of their conversations, "I think what you discovered about protective perception might apply to other fields too. What if teachers could develop enhanced awareness of student learning patterns? What if doctors could develop better intuition about patient treatment options? What if engineers could perceive structural problems before they become dangerous?" The insight was remarkably sophisticated for a 13-year-old, but it reflected the kind of thinking that had begun to emerge from academic study of the program's principles. Civilian applications were being explored in fields ranging from emergency response to financial analysis, always with the same emphasis on ethical development and voluntary participation. Marcus's parents had also been affected by the program's success in ways that went beyond the obvious benefits of improved financial security. Lin Chun had begun working with military families who were dealing with the stress of deployment separation, using principles adapted from Marcus's awareness, training to help spouses and children cope with the emotional challenges of military life. David Chun had found his own calling in working with veterans who were struggling with the transition from military to civilian careers. His experience as an immigrant who'd built a new life in America gave him unique insights into the challenges of adapting to unfamiliar environments and expectations. The patience and precision he'd developed through years of restaurant work proved remarkably applicable to helping former Marines find their place in civilian employment. "Son," David said during one of their conversations, "your mother and I always hoped that our sacrifices would give you opportunities to serve others. But we never imagined that your service would create opportunities for us to serve others too." The family's involvement in military community support had become another validation of the program's core principle, that exceptional performance emerged when individual capabilities were connected to larger purposes. Marcus's enhanced perception had been triggered by his desire to protect others, and his family's contributions to the military community reflected the same motivation. As the program entered its third year, Marcus faced new challenges that went beyond training development and implementation. The success of the Chen protocol had established him as a thought leader in military training innovation, and he was increasingly called upon to address broader questions about the future of military service and the role of enhanced human capabilities in national defense. The most significant of these challenges came from an unexpected source: a group of former program participants who'd completed their military service and returned to civilian life. They'd formed an informal organization called the Protective Service Network, dedicated to applying the principles they'd learned to civilian law enforcement, emergency response, and community safety initiatives. Marcus received a letter from the group's founder, former Corporal Maria Santos, who'd become a police officer in Denver after completing her Marine service. "Sergeant Chen," she wrote, "the awareness training you provided didn't end when we left the military. If anything, it's become more important in civilian law enforcement, where the stakes are just as high, but the support systems are different. We'd like your help in adapting the program for police training." The request presented both opportunities and challenges. Civilian law enforcement operated under different legal and ethical constraints than the military, and the potential for misuse of enhanced awareness capabilities was significant. But the opportunity to extend the program's benefits to civilian public safety was compelling, especially given the current state of police-community relations in many American cities. Marcus decided to accept the consulting role, but with strict conditions. Any civilian adaptation of the program would need to include enhanced training in de-escalation techniques, community engagement, and ethical decision-making. The goal would be to create police officers who were more aware of community needs and more skilled at protecting both public safety and civil rights. The civilian expansion of the program brought Marcus into contact with academic researchers, policy analysts, and community leaders who were working to improve police effectiveness while reducing incidents of excessive force. Dr. Sarah Chen's research had shown that enhanced situational awareness could actually reduce the likelihood of violent confrontations by enabling earlier recognition of de-escalation opportunities. "What we're seeing," Dr. Chen explained during a presentation to the International Association of Chiefs of Police, "is that officers trained in protective perception techniques are more likely to identify nonviolent solutions to potentially dangerous situations. Enhanced awareness doesn't just improve tactical performance, it improves judgment." The research findings supported Marcus's belief that the program's principles could be adapted to civilian applications without compromising its ethical foundations. But he insisted on maintaining strict oversight and evaluation processes to ensure that the civilian versions achieved the same positive outcomes that had made the military program successful. The expansion into civilian applications also brought new recognition for Marcus's contributions to military and public safety training. He received the Navy and Marine Corps' Commendation Medal for his development of innovative training methods, and was invited to speak at national conferences on military education and human performance optimization. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source: the Afghan government, which had established a scholarship program for the children who'd been saved by Marcus's intervention 3 years earlier. The program was designed to ensure that those 43 children would have access to higher education opportunities that would enable them to contribute to Afghanistan's reconstruction and development. Marcus received a letter from the program coordinator, translated from Dari, that read, "Sergeant Chen, the children whose lives you saved are now young scholars who dream of becoming teachers, doctors, engineers, and leaders. They do not know your name, but they carry in their hearts the gift of life that your skill and courage provided. Their futures are our gift to you." The letter reminded Marcus that the true measure of the program's success wasn't the number of Marines who'd been trained or the recognition he'd received from military and civilian leaders. The ultimate validation was the lives that had been saved and the futures that had been preserved through enhanced capabilities used in service of others. As Marcus prepared for the next phase of his career, promotion to Staff Sergeant in assignment, as the program's senior instructor, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a single impossible shot on an Afghan mountainside. The enhanced awareness that had made that shot possible had evolved into a comprehensive approach to human development that was changing lives and saving futures across multiple continents. But at its core, the program remained what it had always been, an expression of the simple principle that extraordinary things became possible when ordinary people were properly prepared and motivated to serve others. The impossible shot hadn't been the product of supernatural abilities or experimental enhancement. It had been the culmination of training, purpose, and the mysterious alchemy that occurred when human potential was aligned with righteous cause. Standing once again on that Afghan ridge, 3 years after the shot that had changed everything, Marcus felt the familiar expansion of awareness that signaled the presence of his enhanced perception. But this time, instead of focusing on ballistics or tactical situations, his perception showed him something far more profound: the infinite web of connections that linked every act of service to countless other lives and futures. He could see the children in that Afghan school, now teenagers studying mathematics and literature, with dreams of building a better world. He could see the Marines who'd graduated from his program, serving with enhanced capabilities and ethical clarity around the globe. He could see the civilian law enforcement officers who were learning to protect and serve their communities with greater skill and wisdom. He could see his family thriving and contributing to their own communities with the confidence that came from knowing their sacrifices had meaning. And in that moment of expanded awareness, Marcus understood that the impossible shot hadn't been impossible at all. It had been inevitable, the natural result of preparation meeting opportunity in service of something greater than individual achievement. The true miracle wasn't that the shot had been made, but that it had opened a door to discoveries about human potential that would continue benefiting others for generations to come. The auditorium at Quantico was packed beyond capacity with Marines, international military observers, academic researchers, and civilian law enforcement officials, all gathered to witness the graduation ceremony for the 100th class of the Marcus Chen Protective Perception Protocol. Staff Sergeant Chen, now 26 years old and bearing the weathered confidence of a career Marine, stood at the podium looking out at faces that represented 23 different nations and 6 different military services. 3 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily across the silent auditorium, I took a shot that everyone said was impossible. Today, I'm looking at 300 Marines who've learned to make the impossible routine, not through supernatural abilities or experimental enhancement, but through the simple recognition that extraordinary performance becomes accessible when we connect our skills to our purpose. The graduating class represented the program's evolution from a small training initiative to a fundamental shift in how military organizations approached human development. The graduates included snipers who could consistently hit targets at ranges previously considered theoretical, helicopter pilots who could navigate impossible weather conditions, medics who could triage casualties with intuitive precision, and intelligence analysts who could detect patterns in data that traditional methods missed. But more significantly, They represented a new generation of military professionals who understood that their enhanced capabilities came with enhanced responsibilities. Every graduate had been required to complete extensive training in ethical decision-making, cultural sensitivity, and the protection of civilian populations. The program's motto, "Strength through Service," reflected its core philosophy that true power came through dedication to causes larger than personal advancement. The ceremony was being broadcast live to military installations around the world, with simultaneous translation into 17 languages. The international interest reflected the program's expansion into NATO training standards and its adoption by military services from Australia to Canada to the United Kingdom. General Patricia Hayes, now Commandant of the Marine Corps, served as the ceremony's keynote speaker. Staff Sergeant Chen's innovation represents more than an advance in military training, she told the global audience. It represents a fundamental recognition that human beings are capable of far more than we've previously understood, and that the key to unlocking this potential lies not in artificial enhancement, but in ethical development of natural capabilities. In the audience, Marcus could see his parents and Emma, now 16 and preparing to attend MAT on a full academic scholarship. Their presence represented not just family pride, but validation of the immigrant dream that had brought them to America. Decades earlier, David Chen wore a medal that Marcus had insisted be given to him, the Marine Corps Civilian Service Award, recognizing his contributions to veteran employment programs. Lin Chen had her own recognition, having been named Military Spouse of the Year for her work with deployment support services. Emma had evolved into Marcus's most insightful critic and advisor, approaching his work with the analytical rigor of a gifted mathematician and the emotional intelligence of someone who understood the human cost of military service. "Marcus," she'd said the night before the ceremony, "what you've created isn't just about making better soldiers. It's about making better people who happen to be soldiers." The observation captured something that traditional military training approaches had often missed: the connection between personal development and professional effectiveness. The Marines graduating today weren't just more skilled at their military occupations. They were more aware of their responsibilities to their communities, more confident in their ability to make ethical decisions under pressure, and more committed to service as a lifelong calling rather than temporary employment. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning at the Marine Corps Training and Development Command, addressed to Master Sergeant Marcus Chen in careful handwriting that suggested English as a second language. The return address indicated it had come from Kabul, Afghanistan, and the official seal suggested it was from a government ministry. Marcus opened it in his office, which had been transformed over the years into something resembling a combination of military command center and academic research facility. The walls were covered with photographs of program graduates, certificates of international cooperation, and maps showing the global expansion of the Protective Perception Protocol. The letter was from Dr. Fatima Ahmad, Director of Educational Development for Afghanistan's Ministry of Education. She wrote, "Master Sergeant Chen, I am writing to inform you of something I believe will interest you greatly. 5 years ago, 43 children were saved from a terrorist attack on their way to school in the Kunar province. Today, all 43 of those children have graduated from secondary education with honors, and 37 have been accepted to universities around the world." The letter continued, "These young scholars do not know the name of the American soldier who saved their lives that day, but they have dedicated themselves to building the kind of Afghanistan that would honor his sacrifice. They study medicine, engineering, education, and law with the understanding that their survival was a gift that carries obligations to serve others." Marcus felt the familiar expansion of awareness that still occurred when his enhanced perception was triggered by profound emotional moments. But instead of seeing ballistic trajectories or tactical situations, his perception showed him the ripple effects of that single shot extending across years and continents. touching lives and shaping futures in ways he could never have anticipated. The letter included photographs of the 43 students at their graduation ceremony. They were young adults now, their faces showing the intelligence and determination that Marcus had somehow perceived in that brief glimpse of a school bus disappearing around a mountain curve 8 years earlier. One photograph showed them holding a banner written in English, "To the unknown guardian, your protection became our purpose." Dr. Ahmad's letter concluded, "These students have requested permission to establish a scholarship program for American military families, specifically for the children of service members who have been wounded or killed in Afghanistan. They wish to call it the Guardian Angel Scholarship, and they hope that you might help them establish contact with appropriate American educational institutions." The request represented a completion of the circle that had begun with Marcus's impossible shot. The children he'd saved were now young adults who wanted to save others through education and opportunity. Their offer to provide scholarships for American military families was both generous and strategically brilliant. It would create lasting bonds between the people of both nations while honoring the sacrifices made by service members and their families. Marcus immediately began working with the State Department and Department of Veterans Affairs to facilitate the scholarship program. The bureaucratic process was complex, but the symbolism was powerful enough to generate bipartisan political support. Within 6 months, the Guardian Angel Scholarship Program had been established with funding from Afghan students, American veterans, organizations, and international development agencies. The award ceremony at the White House was smaller than the massive military graduations Marcus had grown accustomed to, but infinitely more meaningful. President Sarah Chen, the former Stanford neuroscientist, no relation despite the shared surname, who'd been elected on a platform of evidence-based policy and international cooperation, was presenting Marcus with the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to military training, innovation, and international peacebuilding. "Master Sergeant Chen," President Chen said as she placed the medal around his neck, "your work has demonstrated that the most profound innovations often come not from technological advancement, but from deeper understanding of human potential. The training protocols you've developed have not only enhanced military effectiveness, they've created a new model for international cooperation based on shared commitment to protecting the innocent." The ceremony was attended by representatives from 47 nations that had implemented versions of the protective perception protocol in their military and civilian training programs. The international expansion had been carefully managed to ensure that the program's ethical foundations were maintained while adapting to different cultural and institutional contexts. Emma, now a professor of applied mathematics at MIT and a leading researcher in human performance optimization, served as the ceremony's technical advisor. Her doctoral dissertation had provided the mathematical framework for understanding the enhanced perception that her brother had first demonstrated, creating a bridge between subjective experience and objective measurement that had enabled the program's scientific validation. "What Marcus discovered," Emma explained to reporters after the ceremony, "is that human consciousness is capable of processing vastly more environmental information than we typically access through conscious awareness. His training protocols don't create supernatural abilities, they simply teach people to access capabilities that were already present but normally suppressed." The scientific understanding of the program had evolved significantly over the decades since its inception. Research conducted at universities around the world had identified the neurological mechanisms underlying enhanced situational awareness, leading to applications in fields ranging from aviation safety to surgical precision to financial risk assessment. But the practical applications had remained true to Marcus's original vision: enhanced capabilities used in service of protecting others. The program had been adopted by humanitarian organizations working in disaster zones, medical teams providing emergency care in conflict areas, and teachers working with at-risk student populations. The phone call came at 3:17 a.m., rousing Marcus from sleep in his quarters at Camp Pendleton, where he now served as Director of Advanced Training Development. The caller identified himself as Colonel James Morrison, commanding officer of a Marine unit deployed to Somalia, and his voice carried the urgency that Marcus had learned to associate with developing crisis situations. "Sir," Colonel Morrison said, "we have a situation that requires capabilities beyond conventional military response. Terrorists have taken hostage a school containing over 200 children, and the tactical situation is too complex for standard rescue operations. We have 3 Marines here who graduated from your program, and they're requesting permission to attempt a rescue using enhanced perception techniques." The situation was exactly the kind of scenario that the program had been designed to address, but it also represented the ultimate test of whether the training could produce reliable results under maximum stress conditions. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility that had accompanied every major decision since that first impossible shot 15 years earlier. "Colonel Morrison," Marcus replied, "patch me through to your team leaders. I want to assess their readiness and coordinate their approach." The next 6 hours were spent in intense communication with the deployed unit, analyzing intelligence data, weather conditions, structural layouts, and tactical options. The 3 program graduates, now seasoned Marines, with multiple deployments and advanced training, demonstrated the kind of enhanced situational awareness that Marcus had hoped the program would develop. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the former troubled recruit who'd become one of the program's most successful graduates, was now the senior sniper. Her assessment of the tactical situation showed the kind of multi-dimensional thinking that characterized advanced practitioners of protective perception. "Sir," Santos reported, "I can see 17 distinct firing positions that would allow U.S. to neutralize the terrorists without endangering the hostages, but they require coordination with entry teams and precise timing based on the movement patterns inside the building." Gunnery Sergeant David Kim, a combat engineer who developed enhanced perception for detecting explosive devices, had identified the terrorists' likely escape routes and potential secondary threats. "Master Sergeant Chen, they've got the building rigged with explosives, but I can see the pattern of the wiring. If we approach from specific angles and disable the charges in the right sequence, we can prevent detonation." Captain Jennifer Walsh, formerly the military journalist, now a Marine officer specializing in hostage negotiation, had been monitoring communications between the terrorists and analyzing their psychological profiles. "Sir, I can see opportunities for coordinated negotiation and tactical action that would maximize the chances of peaceful resolution, while maintaining the option for force if necessary." The operation proceeded exactly as the team had visualized. Enhanced perception allowed the Marines to identify optimal timing, coordinate complex movements, and respond to unexpected developments with the kind of intuitive precision that no amount of conventional planning could have provided. All 200 children were rescued without injury. The terrorists were captured alive for intelligence purposes, and the explosive devices were neutralized without incident. The successful mission made international headlines, but Marcus was more interested in the after-action reports that provided detailed analysis of how enhanced perception had functioned under actual combat conditions. The findings confirmed that the program's training methods could produce reliable results even in the most challenging circumstances, but they also revealed areas where further development was needed. Marcus stood once again on the Afghan ridge, where his journey had begun 2 decades earlier, but the landscape around him had been transformed. The school that had been the target of the terrorist attack was now a university, with over 3,000 students from across Central Asia studying everything from renewable energy engineering to conflict resolution. The road where the school bus had traveled was now a modern highway connecting rural communities to urban centers throughout the region. More significantly, Afghanistan had become one of the most stable and prosperous nations in the region, partly due to the leadership provided by the generation that had been saved by Marcus's intervention. 12 of the original 43 children had become government ministers. 15 were doctors or engineers working on reconstruction projects. 8 were teachers or educational administrators, and the remaining 8 were serving in various capacities that contributed to their nation's development. Dr. Fatima Ahmed, one of the original 43 and now Afghanistan's Minister of Education, stood beside Marcus as they observed the university's graduation ceremony. "Colonel Chen," she said. Marcus had been promoted to full colonel and placed in charge of international training cooperation. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had missed that shot 20 years ago?" Marcus considered the question. As he watched hundreds of young Afghan students receiving their degrees, their faces bright with hope and determination, his enhanced perception, now refined through 2 decades of development and application, showed him the alternative timeline that Dr. Ahmed was asking about, the devastation that would have occurred if 43 children had died that day, the despair that would have consumed their families and communities, the cycle of violence and revenge that would have continued for generations. "Dr. Ahmad," Marcus replied, "I've learned that the most important shots aren't the ones you take, but the ones that create opportunities for others to build something better than what existed before. That shot was just the beginning. Everything that's happened since then has been the result of choices made by people like you and your classmates." The ceremony concluded with an announcement that made Marcus's eyes fill with tears. The university was establishing the Marcus Chen Institute for Protective Leadership, dedicated to training the next generation of leaders who would use enhanced capabilities in service of peace and development. But more meaningful than the honor was the knowledge that the principles he developed were being adapted for civilian applications that would benefit people around the world. The Institute's mission statement, read aloud in 3 languages, captured the essence of what Marcus had learned over 20 years of developing and implementing the program. "True strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect. True leadership comes not from the power to command, but from the courage to serve. True innovation comes not from creating new capabilities, but from discovering the potential that already exists within every human being." As Marcus prepared to leave Afghanistan for what would likely be his final visit, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a single impossible shot and evolved into a global movement for ethical development of human potential. The enhanced perception that had made that shot possible had become a tool for building bridges between nations, developing leaders who prioritize service over power, and creating educational programs that produce citizens who were both capable and committed to protecting others. The retirement ceremony at Marine Corps Base Quantico was attended by over 5,000 people representing military services from 67 nations, civilian organizations from around the world, and 3 generations of program graduates. Colonel Marcus Chen, now 55 years old and preparing to transition from active military service to civilian education, had spent a quarter-century developing training programs that had fundamentally changed how military and civilian organizations approached human development. The ceremony's keynote address was delivered via satellite link by Dr. Fatima Ahmad, now Secretary General of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. "Colonel Chen," she said, her image projected on screens throughout the auditorium, 25 years ago you saved 43 children from a terrorist attack. Today, those children have grown into leaders who are working to save the world from ignorance, poverty, and violence. Your impossible shot became our possible future." The statistics documenting the program's impact were impressive by any measure. Over 100,000 military personnel trained across 6 continents, civilian applications implemented in 43 countries, measurable reductions in combat casualties, and civilian harm wherever the protocols had been implemented. But Marcus knew that the true measure of success wasn't found in statistics. It was found in the individual lives that had been transformed and the communities that had been protected. Emma, now director of the MIT Center for Human Performance Research and a leading authority on the scientific basis of enhanced perception, introduced her brother with a presentation that summarized the research findings that had emerged from 25 years of studying the program's effects. What my brother discovered, Emma told the audience, is that human beings are naturally capable of extraordinary performance when three conditions are met: proper training that develops both technical skills and situational awareness, clear motivation that connects individual capabilities to larger purposes, and ethical frameworks that ensure enhanced abilities are used in service of protecting others rather than advancing personal interests. The research had validated what Marcus had intuited from the beginning, that enhanced perception wasn't a supernatural phenomenon, but a natural expression of human potential that became accessible when consciousness was properly trained and motivated. The implications extended far beyond military applications, influencing fields ranging from education to healthcare to environmental protection. As Marcus approached the podium for his farewell address, he could see in the audience faces that represented every phase of his career. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now retired, but still serving as a civilian contractor training new instructors. General Patricia Hayes, whose support had been crucial during the program's early development. Dr. Sarah Chen from Stanford, whose research had provided scientific validation for the program's methods. But most importantly, he could see hundreds of program graduates who had gone on to serve in various capacities around the world. Each of them represented a life that had been enhanced through ethical training, a community that had been protected through enhanced capabilities, and a future that had been secured through the commitment to use strength in service of others. 25 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him an effective teacher and leader. I took what everyone called an impossible shot. But I learned that nothing is truly impossible when you have the right preparation, the right motivation, and the right support from the people around you. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces that represented thousands of hours of training, millions of dollars in program development, and immeasurable human potential that had been developed and channeled toward constructive purposes. The shot I took saved 43 children. But the program that emerged from that experience has saved thousands more, and the principles we've developed will continue saving lives long after all of us are gone. That's the real measure of success, not what we accomplish individually, but what we enable others to accomplish through the capabilities and values we help them develop. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of Marcus's final military decoration, the Marine Corps' Distinguished Service Medal, for exceptionally meritorious service in developing training programs that had enhanced military effectiveness while maintaining the highest ethical standards. But the award that meant the most to him was presented by a delegation of Afghan students who had traveled to Quantico, specifically for his retirement ceremony. They presented him with a hand-carved wooden plaque that bore the inscription, "To Colonel Marcus Chen, whose impossible shot made our possible futures. From the children you saved, the leaders you trained, and the communities you protected. Your strength became our strength. Your service became our service. Your legacy will endure in every life we touch." As Marcus left active military service and began the next phase of his career as a civilian educator and consultant, he carried with him the knowledge that the impossible shot that had defined his early career had become the foundation for a global movement that would continue long after his own contributions were forgotten. The enhanced perception that had made that shot possible had evolved into a comprehensive approach to human development that was changing how organizations around the world approach training, leadership, and service. But perhaps most importantly, he carried with him the understanding that true impossibility existed only in the absence of proper preparation, clear purpose, and unwavering commitment to protecting others. Given those conditions, he had learned human beings were capable of extraordinary things, not through artificial enhancement or supernatural intervention, but through the simple recognition that their individual capabilities were most powerful when connected to causes larger than themselves. The documentary premiere at the Kennedy Center was attended by diplomats, military leaders, educators, and 3 generations of families whose lives had been touched by the programs Marcus had developed. Over 3 decades of service. The Impossible Shot, a story of service and transformation, had been produced by Emmy-winning filmmaker Jennifer Walsh Morrison, the former military journalist turned Marine officer, now a prominent documentary producer, as a comprehensive examination of how a single moment of enhanced perception had evolved into a global movement for ethical human development. Marcus, now 65 and serving as president of the International Institute for Protective Leadership, watched from the audience as the film told the story that had shaped his entire adult life. The documentary included interviews with the Afghan students who had been saved by his intervention 3 decades earlier, many of whom were now senior government officials, university professors, and business leaders who had helped transform their nation into a model of democratic development and international cooperation. But the film also told the broader story of how the training programs that had emerged from that single shot had influenced military and civilian organizations around the world. The Marcus Chen Protective Perception Protocol had been implemented by military services on every continent, adapted for civilian applications ranging from emergency response to educational innovation, and integrated into international cooperation. Initiatives that had contributed to measurable reductions in global conflict and humanitarian crises. The most moving segment of the documentary featured interviews with program graduates who had used their enhanced capabilities to prevent tragedies, protect communities, and build bridges between groups that had previously been in conflict. Their stories illustrated the program's core principle that enhanced abilities were most valuable when used in service of others, and that true leadership came from empowering others rather than accumulating personal power. Dr. Fatima Ahmad, now in her late 40s and serving as Afghanistan's president, provided the documentary's closing commentary. Colonel Chen's impossible shot saved 43 children 30 years ago, she said, speaking from the presidential palace in Kabul. But the programs that emerged from that experience have saved countless lives around the world. More importantly, they've shown us that human beings are capable of far more than we previously imagined, and that the key to unlocking this potential lies not in technology or artificial enhancement, but in ethical development of our natural capabilities. The documentary's premiere was followed by a panel discussion featuring Marcus, Emma, now recognized as the world's leading authority on the scientific basis of enhanced perception, and several program graduates who had gone on to leadership positions in various fields. The conversation focused on the future of human development and the potential for scaling the program's principles to address global challenges ranging from climate change to international terrorism. The question we face now, Emma said during the panel discussion, is not whether human beings are capable of extraordinary performance. 30 years of research and application have proven that conclusively. The question is whether we can develop the institutional frameworks and ethical standards needed to ensure that enhanced capabilities are used for constructive rather than destructive purposes. The observation captured the central challenge that Marcus had grappled with throughout his career. Enhanced human capabilities could be tremendously beneficial when properly developed and ethically applied, but they could also be dangerous if used without appropriate oversight and moral guidance. The success of his programs had depended on maintaining strict ethical standards while pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible in human performance. As the evening concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had begun with a young Marine taking an impossible shot on an Afghan mountainside and evolved into a global movement that had touched millions of lives. The enhanced perception that had made that shot possible had become a tool for building understanding between cultures, developing leaders who prioritize service over self-interest, and creating educational programs that prepared citizens to address the complex challenges of an interconnected world. But perhaps most significantly, the journey had demonstrated that the most profound innovations often came not from technological advancement, but from deeper understanding of human potential. The impossible shot had been impossible only until someone with the right training, motivation, and support had made it routine. Once that barrier had been broken, thousands of others had learned to achieve similar results through ethical development of their natural capabilities. The bus full of children continued down the mountain road, carrying its precious cargo toward futures that would be shaped by education, opportunity, and the knowledge that somewhere in the world there were people willing to take impossible shots to protect the innocent. The echo of that single bullet, fired in perfect precision across 3 kilometers of Afghan air, would resonate through generations of lives lived in service to others. And in training facilities around the world, new generations of protectors were learning that the most impossible shot of all was often the one not taken, the moment when wisdom, restraint, and ethical clarity proved more powerful than any weapon ever forged. Thank you for watching this incredible story of courage and impossible precision. Stories like Marcus Chen's remind us of the extraordinary capabilities that emerge when skill meets purpose. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who appreciate tales of heroism and human potential. Your support helps us continue bringing you these powerful narratives.